This week on Quadriga, Germany votes, high stakes for Europe. Germans head for the polls this weekend. Will they choose to stick with what they know or decide to give the opposition a chance at the helm? Will the political landscape in Europe's most populous country and largest economy change? And what will the outcome mean for Europe? Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. What, if anything, will change after this German election? That's one of the questions that we want to talk about today with three correspondents who've been following the election very closely. And they are Ulrike Winkelmann. She's been reporting and writing for the Berlin-based newspaper, The Taz, since 1999, and she's now one of its chief editors for domestic politics. And with Laura Lucchini. She's an Italian-born freelance journalist based here in Berlin. She's writing for El País in Spain and for the Italian publication L'Inchiesta. And I'm very pleased to welcome back to the program Alan Posner. He was born in London and grew up in Kuala Lumpur and West Berlin. He contributes to a variety of media, among them the debate magazine The European and the German newspaper Die Welt. Let's start out by taking a look at what the rest of Europe thinks about this election and what it's expecting. And Laura Lucchini, perhaps you can give us some insights into what some of the southern European countries are thinking.
Yeah, of course, in Italy there's a general recognition that what will happen in Berlin on Sunday will have an effect on the whole Europe. Of course, in Italy, the voters, the electors had been quite angry, mad to Angela Merkel because of the austerity policies she imposed during the crisis to all South European countries. There had been like a moment of really strong tension between the two countries, and that was like last summer when the crisis got really strong, and it was impossible for Italy to borrow to finance the debt on the financial markets.
Has that tension reduced now? Is there a sense that the worst might be over?
Yeah, that was. I was gonna say that they realized in a moment that they had a friend in Germany, but it was in Berlin. He was in Frankfurt. And I'm talking about the director of European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, when he announced his outright monetary transaction that the announcement managed to reduce the pressure of the spreads between the German bonds and the Italian bonds. And so also, it had also a political consequence that Italy started to feel that there was a bright recognition about what the central bank did, and it may change something on a European level. They are asking for more flexibility on this kind of policy, because just with austerity, people in Italy have the feeling that they are not going to succeed, they're not coming out from this crisis. They didn't like Merkel to say what is good for us, it's going to be good for you as well, because they don't think it matches. They think Italy is another country. Of course, Italy needs to do reforms, but it's not 100% the same country.
So you say they're looking for greater flexibility. In just a moment, we're going to talk about whether, in fact, a new government might deliver that. But let me ask Alan Posner first of all, the English media. What are they expecting? What are they saying about this election?
I just got back from London, actually. I was there on Monday and Tuesday talking to people at the BBC and think tanks and so on. And they, too, want more flexibility from Angela Merkel, and they're hoping for it, because David Cameron, you know, he's facing a referendum on Britain staying in the European Union or going out in 2017 at the latest. And he's hoping that Angela Merkel will agree to the treaty changes he needs to give back some power to the nation states, in this case, of course, Britain. And she's been making some noises like this. And I think it's interesting that the Italians are hoping for sort of a closer union and Germany to pay more, if you will, to subsidize their debt, whereas the British are hoping, because she's made those kind of noises, that there's actually going to be less integration. She's going to agree to a looser European Union, which was across the board the idea that people seem to have in London.
So in general, a bit of a cipher, perhaps saying different things to different audiences. We'll come back in just a minute to those expectations and whether they will be met. But Ulrike Winkelmann, if we look at this campaign in general, actually the EU, European policy, have played a very, very minor role. I think in the debate between the two candidates for Chancellor, it took up all of about 8 minutes of an hour and a half. How do you explain that to an international audience? What's going on here in this, by most accounts, rather boring election campaign?
Yes, and everybody thinks that Europe is the most boring issue to talk about. The Germans do not like to talk about the euro crisis, the financial crisis, and they do not like to talk about Europe altogether because it makes them feel uncomfortable. They know that actually half of Europe is mad with them because obviously our wealth goes at the expense of Southern Europe. But everybody knows that the situation is too complex to be pinned down in 2 or 3 sentences and to be explained on TV. And especially the SPD doesn't have an interest to talk about Europe because the SPD always has problems making clear why they actually voted for all Merkel plans, at the same time saying, well, actually, but we still have some other ideas which, oh, we can't explain right now. And it doesn't make people very comfortable to know that the SPD pretends to know better, says they have some demands, some ideas which might ease the fate of the southern European countries, at the same time lifting their hands for every Merkel plan that there's been the last years.
You talked about the discomfort of German voters. One of the things, in talking more about Europe, one of the things that is a bit puzzling when you look from outside is the extraordinarily strong support that the Chancellor still retains. Some of the highest popularity ratings ever for this Chancellor at the end of her second term in office. Mm-hmm. How do you explain this strong proclivity on the part of the Germans, apparently, to stick with what they have?
Yeah. Well, you can talk a lot about Germans being conservative and being frightened of everything new. But I think this special situation is ruled by one sentence which has been very famous the last 20 years. It's the economy stupid. I mean, Germany is doing well economically. And if the economy wasn't that fine, of course, everybody would be more critical of Merkel. At the same time, she has indeed got a personality of which even the critics of her, like, for example, my newspaper, do not really make sense how it works so fine. She has an appearance of integrity, she has an appearance of honesty, which really can hardly be scratched only. We call her Teflon lady, because whatever you try to criticize of her, it somehow, it just drops off.
It's the impression we have as a foreign journalist, is that nobody is criticizing directly Angela Merkel on the media, because it's also really unpopular. I mean, people don't seem to like to read that Angela Merkel is doing bad things. I mean, I remember in the middle of the crisis, when all the Greeks were mad to Angela Merkel, and all the Italians and Spaniards as well, and then suddenly Handelsblatt come out with a special issue about how everything is beautiful in Germany, and with interviews to Italian and Greek people saying that Angela Merkel was good. I mean, we have the feeling that sometimes the press in Germany has been too mellow with Angela Merkel.
But on the other hand, of course, Alan Posner, intellectuals have been anything but mellow. They've basically accused the entire nation of being asleep at the wheel. One interpretation that I saw this week shed some light on that, and I'm wondering to what extent you agree, namely that underneath the sense that Germany is doing fine economically is a very deep-seated insecurity about where things might be going, and that Chancellor Merkel manages to calm that insecurity and give people the sense that they are in sure hands.
Well, that's definitely what she's based her campaign on, basically the sure hands, you know, trust me, you know me. That's the first secret of her success. The second secret is that she never comes out with any explanation of her policy. She never declares, I'm going to do this because of that. There's no vision. There's no vision. The vision thing, as George Bush Sr. said, that's not her thing at all. So there's nothing, to criticize. She's never said anything. She always presents things as a fait accompli. And this is why people get the impression, yes, she's mutti, she's mummy, she's going to take care of things, she's going to kiss things better. And the fact that, in fact, Germany isn't in such a good position, that we have very serious problems, also economic problems up ahead, doesn't seem to gain any traction.
That style that you just described, of course, would be an ideal style for reacting to crises. And there were plenty of crises in her first 2 terms that she did need to react to. The question is, looking ahead, if she were to win a 3rd term, will she change that style and become a real reformer? I'd like to talk about that, but before we do, let's take a little poll here to find out what everybody thinks about who will win this election. We've all been more or less assuming she is going to get a 3rd term, but I'd like to know which coalitions each of you thinks are most likely to come into being and what that might mean for European politics. Starting with Ulrike.
I would find it a disaster, but I'm afraid we'll have a grand coalition of CDU and SPD.
Social Democrats now in the opposition with Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. And what would you expect from a coalition like that?
Nothing new. Merkel will not change her style. She's actually used to the Social Democrats she's then going to be in charge with. And the SPD will try to put through some social reforms, of course, but it'll actually be due to the economic position we'll then be in, which might be gloomier the coming 2 years if they really make it. So Merkel won't change.
Okay, Laura Lucchini, what do you think is in store?
I think it's the death of politics, but I would bet on a grand coalition as well. I think on a European level, a strong presence of social democrats, and it's our hope, South European, would allow more flexibility on European issue and a stronger...
Even if they're governing with the current Christian Democrats together?
I think so, because Angela Merkel started to recognize that they had to put an accent on impulse, on their growth, and they started with some announcement, just formal announcement about making something to fight the problem of unemployment, youth unemployment in Europe. I think this would be one of the first issues that a grand coalition would address just after the election. Of course, this topic disappeared during the electoral campaign because Angela Merkel wouldn't like to say that Germany will pay to impulse employment in other country when in Germany there's no problem about that. But I think it will be one of the first issues because everybody agrees on it and would be like opening a door to Europe.
So you say a bit of change on EU policy, and yet you also say death of politics. That seems like a contradiction.
Of course, because I see a grand coalition, a solution that a country should take in some emergency moment. Like in Italy we have it, but in Italy we have emergencies. And here in Germany, where the situation is relatively better and relatively good compared to the rest of Europe, I would have hoped in a government, in a political government with a majority capable to change things, to reform the country, to put it forward. I don't think, I mean, that the grand coalition is the death of a debate, the political debate. It kills the interest in politics. It sleeps the people, and that's what I don't like of grand coalitions.
Alan Posner, I'm going to ask you for 2 takes on this, because I did read an article in which you told the public how you plan to vote. So I'd like to know that, and I'd like to know what you actually think is going to happen on Sunday.
Well, I'm going to vote for Angela Merkel with gritted teeth because I don't think she's done a very good job, and I'm going to give my second vote to the Free Democrats because I think that Germany needs a liberal voice.
The current junior coalition partner, just to remind our
viewers. Who I think also suck, quite frankly. But, you know, the devil you know. So that's what I'm going to do.
So you would be voting to essentially keep the same government in office?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
through gritted teeth.
Okay.
And also because I think that it's by no means a foregone conclusion that Merkel will win. I think it's perfectly possible that the Euro-critical alternative for Germany, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, does get more votes than people think they will. And they might take them away from Merkel's right-wing coalition, centre-right coalition, and that could lead to a surprise upset and to a red-green majority, if only just. And that, I think, would be an even greater disaster than Merkel. So it's the devil in the deep blue sea, if you will, and I'm choosing the devil.
And what do you think will actually happen?
I'm afraid we're going to have a grand coalition in the end, as everyone thinks in Germany now, and I'm afraid you will not get what you want. I think the point about the grand coalition, why it might not be such a terrible mistake, is that we're going to have to do some really, really hard thinking on Europe and the euro in the next 2-3 years. It's not going to get better. And we will need a grand consensus to do whatever we have to do, be it Eurobonds, be it leaving the Eurozone, one of the two.
Now, here's something that confuses me a bit, Alan Posner, because the article that I mentioned, you said that you would vote for the existing government because they would be best positioned to essentially terminate Germany's membership in the euro currency. Now, that puzzles me, among other things, because I think you just told us that the small party Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, as it's known, which is very much an anti-euro party, you view as problematic. So what's the story?
Well, the story is that I think the leader of the Alternative für Deutschland, Bernhard Lucke, he's a respected economist. He's got something. I mean, but the party is a party of grumpy old men, which are attracting other grumpy old men, and it's attracting xenophobia and everything that's wrong about German politics gets sort of attracted to them, and therefore I really hope they don't get into Parliament because they're not a force for good. I really hope, however, that the present government realizes somewhere down the line that you can't go on with this present European euro policy, which has led to the Eurozone being a no-growth, in fact negative growth zone, which has led to Germany being universally hated in the southern part of the Eurozone, and the southern part of the Eurozone being universally hated in Germany. It's a terrible, terrible situation which has to be resolved somehow. But not with the Alternative.
Like to come back. Good. Let's stay briefly with the question of the Alternative. Did you want to address that, Laura, or a different aspect?
Yeah,
okay.
It's true. I mean, in Italy, we're looking to Alternative for Deutschland with a lot of interest because, as you may remember, when we had the election last February, a party which is against the euro got into the parliament for after joining the election for the first time. It's a completely different party, the movement 5 Stars, but it's anti-politic party, but it also addresses the problem of the euro in a really close way to Alternative for Deutschland. They say we want to go out from the euro, or we would like to have a referendum about that, and we want to devaluate our currency, and it is exactly what Alternative für Deutschland are proposing. The problem
How dangerous do you think Alternative für Deutschland would be if they do get into parliament? And by the way, my producers have just told me that there is a new poll showing that they most likely will get into parliament. They're now being assessed at 5%. That would just clear the hurdle into parliament. So how risky would that be for Germany?
It's just a bad sign. I mean, they wouldn't influence policy, of course. But
they would not influence policy.
I don't think so. I mean, they will be a small party as well, anyways. But in a way, it's a bad sign because you know, in Italy, they got into parliament with the 25%, 27%. That's a huge amount of votes. And if they start to have like a common view with the German party and then maybe in another country, that starts to be a bigger problem. It won't be a problem in the next 4 years, but it will be a long-term problem.
Ulrike Winkelmann, Alternative für Deutschland. The finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, has said this party is poison for Germany, poison. Clearly, he does take it seriously as a potential threat, or perhaps just because it's siphoning votes away from the CDU. How do you see it?
Well, I wouldn't overestimate it. Even if they get into parliament, which I doubt, they won't have too much influence there. the influence they do have is in the economic scene, because there are a lot of professors, a lot of well-known and well-reputed professors taking part, some of whom I've been talking to the last years over social reforms and all sorts of tax reforms, for example. And all these are intelligent people. They are not stupid, and they are not, in the old sense, conservative and to be left behind. And the kind of power they might have is that they put and pin down correct economic arguments of which the CDU can't say you're just plain wrong. They will have to interact with them in that way, and this will enhance their power, even though there might be only 4 or 5 people in parliament then.
So having an effect on public discourse going forward. So where are we going when we go forward, most likely in all of your eyes, with a grand coalition of the CDU and the SPD together? To figure out what that could mean for Europe, let's take a closer look at where we stand now and what the past 4 years have brought.
The euro crisis has caused misery in deeply indebted EU member states that have been forced to reform. Strict austerity measures championed by Germany were implemented to prevent the collapse of the Eurozone. Protest parties in crisis-hit countries have since profited from anger about demands made by Brussels. But in many countries, Germany is held responsible for continued high unemployment and slashed social benefits. Despite that anger, the majority of Germans still remain staunchly pro-European, and Germany continues to be viewed by other member states as a success story, as well as absolutely key to the EU's future. Although there were differences between Angela Merkel and her challenger, Peer Steinbrück, about the best way to heal Europe's woes, their parties have largely agreed on their country's reaction to the crisis. So even if Germany's political leadership changes after the vote, would anything actually change for Europe?
Ulrike Winkelmann, let's pick right up on that question. Will anything actually change? The SPD, during the election campaign, when it did turn its attention to EU policy, called for a Marshall Plan for the southern European countries. That would speak for Laura Lucchini's notion that perhaps we'll see greater flexibility, perhaps some relaxation of austerity policy, and indeed some experts believe we're already seeing that in the past 8 to 10 months from Angela Merkel's government. What do you think? Will that go forward?
Depending on who actually is in office then, who gets the finance ministry and so on, I would say yes, they'll try to give more money to Southern Europe, basically. If it's called Marshall Plan, then I would doubt, but there will be some economic support, I would say, from the SPD.
Might be called a Gabriel Plan, might it? Sigmar Gabriel, of course, being the current head of the Social Democrats, who apparently might want to have a kind of super economics ministry, some people are saying.
His PR people will be listening closely now and thinking, this is a great idea, make it a Gabriel Plan. But I think what they'll definitely try to do is some sort of banking regulation. They have 2 points, saying that the banks have to sort of look after themselves in the next crisis, the banking restructuring fund thing, which nobody really understands, but it's basically about having the banks pay for themselves if they're in crisis. And they also have some point in saying we need to have more taxes on capital. We have to have some kind of Tobin tax working better than the proposed plans at the moment. So I think there'll be an SPD package. They go into the coalition and we'll see what happens then.
Alan Posner, Ulrike Winkelmann just mentioned banking union. This is one of the crucial issues as we look ahead. And Angela Merkel has given us some very conflicting signs on this particular issue. As we discussed, she tends to say different things at different times to different people.
That's it.
A couple of years ago, she was saying we need more Europe, we need more integration, we've got to get something like a supranational government in place in Europe. On banking union, she's been dragging her feet, looking very much like she does not want that kind of integration. What's the story there, and what do you expect going forward if, in fact, we do wind up with the grand coalition?
Well, the story is that Merkel has abandoned super Europe, and she's created in its stead an intergovernmental Europe, the so-called currency and economic union, or the fiscal compact. These are treaties between the governments of the Eurozone, and she's basically left the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the Council behind her. So she has destroyed Europe in a way. And the banking union is a similar thing. She does not want to give power over the German banks, who are notoriously undercapitalized, to Brussels, to close down, for instance, the German Sparkassen, which are used by regional German politicians for their own sort of pet projects. And so she's proven with the banking union that she doesn't mean a thing she says about more Europe. She actually wants an intergovernmental Europe where at the moment, because Germany is strong, we are setting the tone. But when we become weak, as we will, we are going to have some real problems.
Sounds very much like a Europe that England would be quite content to remain a part of.
No, actually, England would prefer a reform of the EU as a whole. England does. The interesting thing is that the one country which is for a united Europe is, in fact, at the moment, Great Britain. They would prefer powers to be given to the member states, but then to pool the powers that they have, and not to go like Merkel does, to split Europe into an intergovernmental Eurozone and the rest who don't interest her.
Yeah, in the electoral campaign, Merkel sent a really sloppy message about Europe. She's saying all the time we want more Europe, but that doesn't mean we want to transfer more power to Brussels. That's the key. And I think, of course, you said they don't want a banking union because they have problem with the Sparkassen, but it's not a topic in the electoral campaign. And the SPD couldn't bring up this topic because the SPD has its own faults on managing the Landesbank in Germany, the problem with Landesbank in Germany.
Banks.
So Germany is really acting really egoistically in this moment, because the banking union would be like the first step for a country like Spain or Italy to heal their bank system without getting to a help program or help packages like Greece, and that's a huge issue, which Angela Merkel doesn't address really openly and sincerely.
Ulrike Winkelmann, to what degree is this a product of campaign tactics? Would you expect that once the election is finally over, Angela Merkel could take stronger steps, particularly on banking union, than she has in the last 10 to 12 months?
Well, to me, there is a very rational reason for not supporting the banking union as it's been designed so far. Also, the opposition says there might be a problem trying to capitalize banks directly with taxpayers' money. I mean, I see a problem in having the banks directly capitalized with my taxpayers' money. And so this is one reason why the opposition is not too aggressive about this point. And I think the banking union so far, as it's been designed so far, would work to the, well, not to the benefit of the taxpayers, but it might come to the catastrophic outcome that we taxpayers again have to capitalize the banks in Europe without any democratic control. And I don't like that.
The main idea was that the bank themselves would contribute to create a fund to save other banks, but then of course there's the risk.
Yes.
And already some bankers said that they could use the ESM at the first step to save banks, and that of course is a crucial issue.
Perhaps we need to step back just for a moment to remind our viewers, who of course are scattered throughout the entire world, Alan Posner, why this is such an important issue. At the moment, things look pretty calm in Europe. Many people seem to believe the worst of the crisis might be over. Why this big focus on the banking union as a test of where Europe and where the Chancellor herself are going?
Well, because the euro crisis basically was a banking crisis. It was a crisis of confidence in European banks, and this was the reason why they then clamped down on European governments and their debts and so on. So resolving the banking issue. We have lots and lots of banks here who have too much sovereign debt on their books, bad sovereign debt, Greek debt, Italian debt, Spanish debt, Portuguese debt, Irish debt, and so on. And to somehow resolve this problem and free up credit is very important for Europe. And the idea is, the question is, do the nations get to do it themselves? Do they get to do it with the help of the European Stability Mechanism? Or do they do it via a banking union? And the real problem is indeed, what say do voters in the individual countries have to do with this? And the point is that it's always been shifted away to some strange European mechanisms no one knows anything about. I mean, who knows actually who's saying what in the European Stability Mechanism, which lends millions or billions of euros to Spanish banks? No one. I mean, this is something that is done behind closed doors.
Ulrike Winkelmann, basically, it comes down to the question, how stable is Europe at the moment? To what degree is the crisis simply latent and ready to resurface at any moment? Or to what degree have European policymakers, albeit with muddling through small steps, whatever you want to call the very incremental policy making that Angela Merkel herself is engaged in, managed to get the crisis under control?
It is not. It is not under control. I think hardly anybody would say, except for Schäuble, our finance minister, that it is under control. And everybody knows that Greece, Portugal, Slovenia now are in a shaky condition. And nobody knows what's going to happen in France. And,
or Italy.
And I'm just being too polite to mention Italy, actually. And so I would say there's no control. The question only is if the policies of buying time, which is essentially what they are doing the last 5 years, is working in a sense that if you buy your time out of this crisis, that finally the financial markets will calm down in a way that they're not threatening our societies and our states as a whole anymore.
Laura Lucchini, many people have argued on that particular basis that while crisis management, the policy of small steps that Angela Merkel is so often said to have pursued, that this will not be enough moving forward, that we need vision, we need strategy. Do you think that's right? And if so, do you believe that a grand coalition under Angela Merkel is capable of that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think. I mean, I think all Europe should rethink, should put themselves like the big question: what do we want from Europe? How forward are we open to go to build this European Union, and how much otherwise, if not, we will have to have the chance to leave the currency. I don't think nobody in Italy is expecting huge changes. Of course, Europe needs more vision or maybe more courage as well. But I don't see it coming from this government. That this will be again a government acting on small steps. Pretending to do something big when they're just doing something really small. But of course, it all depends also on how the situation develops, for example, in Italy, because we could go to election really soon if the government doesn't resist this moment in which Berlusconi is about, the old political leader Silvio Berlusconi is about to be kicked out from the Senate because of his problem with the justice, and that could cause a political crisis. And then after that, we don't even know what is going to be our future. So we're not hoping too much in Germany saving us.
Alan Posner, interestingly enough, one British publication, The Economist, came out with an endorsement of Angela Merkel as next Chancellor for Germany, and not only next Chancellor for Germany, but leader for Europe. Those were their words. So far, she has tended to lead, if at all, very much from behind. Would you expect her in a third term, her last term, traditionally the time when leaders begin to think about the history books, to come out from behind and take true leadership?
No, quite frankly. The Economist based everything on the hope that she would do that. But what is this hope based on? Judging by past form, that's not the way Angela Merkel operates. I mean, you said it, Ulrike. It's incremental, step by step, trying to buy time. The problem is that time isn't on our side. It's not on Europe's side, and it's not on Germany's side, because we have a demographic problem. We have a problem with the structure of our industry, which is based much too much on cheap labor and cheap euro, by the way. And so time is not on our side, but Merkel's policy is buying time, shoving problems down the road in the hope that they will somehow solve themselves. Now, she's been lucky with this. And whenever she's actually tried to do a policy decision, like she changed our stance on, she was for atomic energy. So that was her main sort of thing 4 years ago. I'm going to be for atomic energy. And she did that. What happened? It blew up in her face, literally, with Fukushima. So she's not going to do that again. That's not her style. And this is why I fear that we're going to get more of the same whoever leads Germany.
Clearly, Ulrike Winkelmann, until now, Germans have been comfortable with the leading from behind, the small steps, the crisis management approach. To what degree would they, and I include you, want to see their Chancellor come out and really take leadership within the country, but also open leadership in Europe?
Well, it would frighten me, to be honest, because I don't think that she's following the right direction. And it's not all Germans being content with her. We've got 1/3 of the population, obviously in a worse state than 10 or 15 years ago. We have a kind of working poor class of people who didn't exist 15 years ago. And those people are not content, it's just that they are not being asked. And so if she came out with leadership, I would be afraid what this should then be. Being really openly neoliberal again, as she used to be 10 years ago, trying to throw around ideas which she wasn't being elected for 10 years ago. And so I wouldn't approve of that.
Let me ask you the question again, divorced from Angela Merkel herself. Your country, is it ready to assume that kind of leadership under any individual who might be elected? Are Germans ready to get out in front as certainly they are the de facto giant in Europe. Are they ready to become that politically as well?
No. They like to be the economic giant, but they don't not want to be asked to be any other kind of giant. Nobody here wants to.
Laura Lucchini,
yeah, I think that's really clear if you live in Germany, but I really notice and hear that people from outside expect Germany to do something more. I mean, if they are in this stronger position and if they impose adjustments to other countries, they should also take more responsibility. That's always the refrain you listen when you travel to other countries. But then being in Germany, you really realize that nobody in Germany would open for such a position in Europe. They really don't want, they're not interested in that.
Alan Posner, is it a generational issue? Is it something that is, of course, a legacy of the Second World War that we will see slowly dissipate when the current political generation, and I'm talking about the people between 50 and 60, do begin to make way for younger politicians here?
No, actually, I think when people talk about Germany's historical legacy, and we don't want to leave because of the Second World War, the First World War, whatever, that's just obfuscation. That's not the real reason. You know, the Red-Green government went into Kosovo. The Red-Green government went into Afghanistan. They weren't worried about wars and so on. We had a war in the Balkans. We have a war at the Hindu Kush area. So, you know, that was done when Joschka Fischer stood up very bravely and said that the one lesson from World War II is surely that we must fight against fascism. And he was quite right. He got a lot of beating from it. But he was
what accounts for the retrenchment since then?
Well, because we feel very complacent about our position in the world. We got through the financial crisis, okay. We got through the euro crisis, fine. So why on earth should we change anything? This is the complacency of Germans, in which they then choose to say, to clothe as a moral issue. Oh no, because we did so many bad things, we're not going to do any good things now. I mean, this is really, really crazy.
Ulrike Winkelmann, that's quite a fascinating notion, the idea that the moral stance that we often hear Germans take, no, we're very shy of leadership, we're very shy of military involvement, we can't do that because of the sins of the past, is actually a cloak for economic interest and a simple desire for comfort?
There's more than a grain of truth to that, I would say. I would also say that the historic narrative is not over and dead, but it is still there. But at least for those people, I would say under the age of 50, it is more that they want to build big cars, they want to drive big cars, and then they want to be left alone. That's it. And I do not approve of that, but I think still that the enormous power of the German export industry, which is a machine building and car industry, lets us sit down on our sofas and be complacent and know that after all the economy decides all of it anyway. The economy decides for us.
Isn't that to some degree in fact true, Laura Lucchini? Don't politicians in nation states the world over face ever less room for maneuver, ever less room to actually put their stamp on things, in other words, to lead?
We experienced that during the crisis, financial markets are deciding instead of government, and then in the last instance, people. But I don't think it's like, I think that can change if there is the political will to do it. I think people in Europe, not just in Germany, not just in Italy, they seem to sleep, not to react. They don't understand maybe the dimension of what is happening.
Alan Posner, it sounds from what we've said so far that all the expectations that a third term for Angela Merkel could be different will in fact be confounded. Would you say that's true?
I'd say that's absolutely true, yeah, unfortunately. Mind you, events are going to shape her third term, not what she does, what she thinks or says.
Okay. I will say that sentence journalists are trained actually never to see, but in this case it is perhaps pertinent. Time will tell. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. Stay with us for the next 4 days. We will be reporting extensively on this election and what it means. Thanks so much.